Daar zijn we weer. En nu op een zolder. Hier is Damien en is net bezig met een verbouwing om de zolder te isoleren. Damien, kan je daar wat meer over vertellen?
Yeah. So we have this room which was really cold before. We had a lot of wind coming from the outside inside, like sliding through the roof. And the heat of the house was really going up to this room and then going out to the outside. So we wanted to improve that to save on the heating costs and also to have this room more comfortable because as soon as the heating was stopped in this room, it was getting cold very quickly. So we had the roof insulated, and now the work is still in progress. So maybe we can show you like the different layers and how it's been done.
Damien heeft dus zijn zolder geïsoleerd en je vraagt je misschien natuurlijk af, wat voor type isolatie zijn er en voor welke isolatie heeft Damien gekozen?
Yes, so the isolation we use here is actually like a wool made of wood. And the reason I choose to go for this type of isolation is because it's a natural material. So actually, it's not so bad for the environment when you produce it. On the contrary, like the wood in it actually store CO2 that you don't burn or compost, and so it's good for that. And also some other insulation require a lot of energy to produce. So polystyrene, polyurethane, they actually release a lot of gas and energy when you produce it. So even if they're very good insulation material, the production in itself is quite damaging for the environment.
And is this more expensive?
Actually, polyurethane is more expensive.
Okay.
But polyurethane, the thickness is less for the same insulation.
Yeah.
So for this material, you need a little bit more thickness.
Yeah.
So if your space is restricted, then it can be a problem. So for instance, under the Dakapel here, we have used polyurethane because the thickness was not much, so we wanted a good insulation in a small space. Yeah. But where we've got more space on the roof, we used the wood insulation.
Okay.
And another advantage of this is also it's quite good for noise. So on the attic, we used to have problem with the wind, as I was saying, or with the rain. It can be noisy, especially if you want to sleep here. And if you've got hard insulation, so that's polystyrene, for instance, you can hear the noise is going through. Yeah. It's quite a hard noise. Well, this is really making the noise a lot more damp, and it absorbs the noise very good.
Yeah.
You can have also other insulation which are a bit cheaper, not as natural, but for rock wool, for instance, it's also used quite commonly in the roofs. An advantage of something hard, fairly elastic like this compared to something hard, is when you're doing renovation, you can actually compress it between the wood, and so there is no gap in between the wood and the isolation, so the air cannot pass around. Yeah. Whereas if you use hard boards like polyurethane or polystyrene, if the wood is not completely straight, you've got a gap appearing and then the air can pass, so then the insulation is not as efficient because you got cold air. Yeah. Going around the insulation.
We staan hier bij het dak en hier kan je veel verschillende lagen zien. Damien, kan je daar wat over vertellen?
Yes. So the idea is you want the insulation to be thick enough so it keeps the house warm, but also you want to have insulation everywhere. So there's actually a first layer which is 8 centimeters, which goes in between the rafter, and it goes against the roof. So that's depending on the roof you have, you might need to leave a gap of air or anything, but you can find, depending on the material and the roof, you have different advice. And that layer in the middle then is covered by a second layer which goes perpendicular to it, with a piece of wood like that to attach it. And the idea is this layer perpendicular will avoid the air passing across here again, and also it will cover the batten of wood, so this is also insulated, so you've got something which is well insulated. An important layer which goes on top of those two layers is film, which prevent the moisture to go from inside the room to the outside. And why you want that is because if you take a shower, for instance, you'll have warm air which is full of humidity, which arrives in the insulation, and when it will reach the cold air from the outside, it will start to condensate, and then you can have water and maybe like a mold which develop into insulation, so it's not good for your roof. Also the wood can start rotting. So you really want to avoid the humidity from the room to reach the cold outside. And the other point of this membrane is to stop the wind. So the wind from the outside, if it's really windy and there's nothing, it can actually pass through all the gaps and the insulation and bring cold air inside. So you want that absolutely like to stop. So you can see here actually like that's already been installed here. You've got so the insulation behind that you cannot see and the membrane here. And what you do is like you need to actually like put tape on every junction. So even like the junction between the membranes, don't let the air pass. So it's taped everywhere. And then on top of that, you've got like some piece of wood and a plasterboard decoration just for finishing.
Wat ook interessant is aan deze zolder is dat Damien vloerverwarming heeft toegepast. Kan je er ook wat over vertellen?
Yes, so we've installed underfloor heating, and the reason is we used to have radiators here, but for radiators you need like you've got a small space of radiators, so you need water which is very hot for that. Whereas if you've got underfloor heating, the temperature can be a lot lower because you've got a much bigger surface to warm the room, and so instead of putting the water at 70 or maybe even 80 degrees in the radiator, you can put the water of your heating at like 30 degrees, for instance, and that's a lot more efficient to produce, so you need less gas or whatever you use to warm the water to produce it. The problem of underfloor heating in an attic like this is the floor is made of wood, so you cannot use concrete or anything, it's too heavy for the house. So we use a solution which is actually made of wood as well. It's a bit like the insulation of the roof, the same kind of material, it's wood, but it's much more dense and compact. So the same advantage, when you walk, it doesn't make that much noise, so also it dampens the sound with the room which are below. And there is a very thin layer of aluminium on top to spread the heat very quickly, and a tube can pass in the middle. So you can see like that's the water, like the hot water will go in the tube like that, and the tube is exactly the right size to be clipped inside the thing. So as you see on the floor, it's not finished, but we've started. So the tube will go like in and out, and it can go all the way to the cellar kettle, like to the boiler for the warm water. So also like one of the things in here we've planned so that each room has got its own underfloor heating circuit. So you can start one room without starting another one. And the idea is like you might want to warm the bathroom in the morning only, but here for instance one of the rooms will be used as an office, and during the day we might want to warm it without warming the bedroom or without warming the bathroom. So you can also like warm some rooms and not some others.
Wat betreft vloerverwarming is het heel interessant om te weten hoe bedien je deze vloerverwarming en kan dit in gescheiden kamers. En Damien heeft daar een heel mooi systeem voor.
Yes, so as I was saying, for the underfloor heating, we've got different zones, so each room can be controlled separately. And for that, we use an equipment which basically you can set the temperature for each room. So you can set what temperature you want at what time you want, and you can program it for different days, and automatically it will set the right temperature. So for instance, warm in the bathroom in the morning and not during the day. And all that actually like this controller send commands to the underfloor heating. So the underfloor heating, you've got the different pipes which goes to the different rooms, and on top of it you've got like a valve which can be opened and closed. So when the temperature of the room is not at the right temperature, then like the valve will open and hot water will go in that room to warm the room, and when it's at the right temperature, or if the schedule say the room is off, then like the valve will close and that room will be closed. So it can be done separately per room. And I think depending on the size of the house and shape of the house, it can be very efficient to save gas.